The red dust rose in lazy spirals behind Nora Beckett's horse, each hoofbeat marking another yard between her and the Thornberry Ranch. 2 years she'd given to that place. 2 years of breaking horses and mending fences, of hauling water and birthing calves in the dead of night. 2 years of proving herself worth 3 hired hands. And what did she have to show for it? Calloused hands, sun-weathered skin, and the same empty pockets she'd arrived with. She didn't look back. Wasn't her way. The mare beneath her, a sturdy bay named Buttercup, a name too gentle for a horse that could outrun most stallions, picked her way along the rutted trail with the same steady determination that had carried Nora through 28 years of living. The saddle creaked with each stride, leather worn soft from countless miles. Everything Nora owned was tied behind that saddle: a bedroll, a change of clothes, her father's old Colt .45, and a leather-bound book of poetry she'd never admit to carrying. The afternoon sun hung low and mean in the sky, painting the desert in shades of copper and rust. Wind tugged at Nora's dark hair, pulling strands loose from the braids she'd tied that morning. She'd stopped trying to tuck them back hours ago. Let the wind have its way. She had bigger concerns than looking presentable. Old Man Thornberry's parting words still echoed. "You're a good worker, Nora, best I've had, but a ranch ain't no place for a woman alone. Folk talk." Folk always talked. They'd talked when she was 15 and her mother died, leaving her to care for her father through his final years of drink and regret. They'd talked when she'd buried him at 19 and sold their small homestead to pay his debts. They'd talked at every ranch, every town, every place she'd tried to make an honest living with her 2 hands and strong back. What they wanted was for her to marry, settle, become some man's property. But Nora had seen what marriage did to women like her, women who could rope a steer as quick as any cowhand, who could read the weather in cloud formations and track a lost calf through rocky terrain. Marriage turned them into shadows, cooking and cleaning and bearing children until their own names got forgotten, replaced by Jake's wife or Tom's woman. The trail forked ahead, one path leading toward Millstone, a proper town with a church and a schoolhouse and presumably plenty of folk ready to talk. The other wound into the Badlands, toward nowhere in particular. Nora pulled Buttercup to a stop, considering she'd left Thornberry's with a week's wages enough for supplies if she was careful. Maybe 2 weeks of boarding house rent if she could find work quick. But October was settling in, and ranch work would be scarce until spring. Most outfits had their winter hands already hired. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals with an ease Nora envied. No one questioned where a hawk belonged. It simply was, simply existed, claiming its piece of sky without apology. "What do you think, girl?" she murmured to Buttercup, who flicked an ear back at the sound of her voice. "Town or wilderness?" The horse shifted, eager to move again. Standing still had never suited either of them. That's when Nora noticed the dust cloud on the horizon, moving fast from the direction of Thornberry's. Riders, probably 3 or 4 by the size of it. Could be anyone, cowboys heading to town, travelers passing through. But something in her gut tightened, an instinct honed by years of staying one step ahead of trouble. She'd left on good terms. Hadn't she? Thornberry had paid her fare, even shook her hand. But his son Jake had been there, watching with those calculating eyes of his. Jake, who'd cornered her in the barn last month, whiskey brave and fumbling, until she'd introduced his face to her knee. He'd kept his distance after that, but men like Jake had long memories and fragile pride, without conscious thought. Nora turned to Buttercup toward the Badlands path. The mare needed no urging, stretching into a ground-eating lope that would tire most horses but was just a comfortable cruise for her. The landscape changed as they moved deeper into rough country red rock formations, rising like ancient sentinels, scrub brush giving way to hardy juniper and pinyon pine. Miles passed. The dust cloud fell away, whether because they'd given up or taken the other fork. Nora didn't know and didn't care to find out. The sun dropped lower, painting long shadows across the broken terrain. She'd need to find shelter soon, somewhere with water for Buttercup and cover in case the wind picked up. That's when she saw it, a thread of smoke rising from a cluster of rocks ahead. Not a wildfire, too thin and steady for that. A campfire, maybe. Or a chimney. As she drew closer, she could make out a structure tucked against a sandstone cliff, barely visible until you were almost on top of it. A way station or line shack. Most likely. The kind of rough shelter that dotted the frontier. Nora slowed Buttercup to a walk, hand drifting to the Colt on her hip. The smoke meant someone was there, and someone could mean trouble. But night was coming, and she'd learned long ago that sometimes you had to weigh one danger against another. The building revealed itself as she approached adobe and rough timber, built practical rather than pretty. A lean-to sheltered a stack of firewood and what looked like a rain barrel. A single horse stood hobbled nearby, a paint gelding that looked up briefly before returning to its grazing. The door opened before she could call out, and a man stepped into the doorway. Not quickly, not with any show of alarm. Just a steady movement that spoke of someone who'd heard her coming and chosen his moment. He was tall, lean in the way of men who worked more than they ate, with brown hair that needed cutting and clothes that had seen better decades. Maybe 30. Maybe 35, hard to tell with men who'd lived rough. He didn't speak, just stood there taking her measure as she sat Buttercup 10 yards out, letting him look his fill. His eyes were gray as winter sky, calm but watchful. No gun in his hand. She noticed, though one rode his hip just as hers did. "Ma'am," he said finally, voice low and steady. "Storm's coming." Nora glanced at the sky, which showed nothing but clear twilight, but she could smell it now that he'd mentioned it, that metallic tang that preceded a dust storm. The pressure change that made her ears feel tight. "Might be," she allowed. "Welcome to shelter here," he continued, stepping aside from the doorway, not blocking her way, not trying to convince her, just stating a fact and letting her decide. It was the lack of persuasion that decided her. Men with bad intentions always tried too hard, smiled too wide, made too many promises. This one just stood there, patient as stone, like it didn't matter to him one way or the other what she chose. "Obliged," Nora said, dismounting with the easy grace of someone who'd spent more time in the saddle than out of it. "Name's Nora Beckett." "Wade Callahan," he replied, moving to help with Buttercup's saddle without being asked. His movements were efficient, practiced, a man who knew horses. They worked in companionable silence, getting Buttercup settled with Wade's paint in the rough corral behind the building. By the time they finished, the wind had picked up, sending grit swirling through the air. First scouts of the storm. Inside, the shelter proved as simple as its exterior suggested. One room with a fireplace, a rough table, 2 chairs that didn't match, and a narrow cot pushed against one wall. Sparse but clean, with that particular order that came from a man living alone and liking it that way. Wade moved to the fire, adding a log with economical movements. A pot of something that smelled like beans and salt pork bubbled on a hook over the flames. Without asking, he took a second bowl from a shelf and ladled out portions for both of them. They ate without conversation, the wind beginning to howl outside. The beans were plain but hot, the coffee bitter but strong. Nora hadn't realized how hungry she was until the food hit her stomach. "Passing through?" Wade asked eventually, not looking up from his bowl. "You could say that." He nodded like that answered everything. Maybe it did. The storm hit in earnest as they finished eating. Dust and debris battering the walls. The building shook but held, built by someone who understood desert weather. Wade added more wood to the fire, then settled into one of the chairs with a piece of harness he'd been mending. Nora expected questions. Where was she from? Where was she going? Why was a woman traveling alone? The questions always came, usually followed by opinions and advice she hadn't asked for. But Wade just worked his leather, fingers steady and sure, leaving her to her own thoughts. She found herself studying him in the firelight, Scars on his hands spoke of rope burns and hard work. His face had that weathered quality of someone who'd spent years squinting into sun and wind. Lines etched around eyes that missed nothing but judged little. There was a stillness to him, like deep water that might be calm or might hide currents you'd never see until too late. "I can bed down with the horses," Nora said when the silence had stretched long enough. Wade looked up then, gray eyes steady. "No need. Cot's yours. I've slept in worse places than a chair by a fire." Pride made her want to argue, but practicality won. The cot would be better than hard ground, and she sensed no threat from this quiet man, whatever had driven him to this lonely shelter. It wasn't the kind of hunger that looked at a woman and saw prey. "Obliged," she said again, the word coming easier this time. As she settled onto the cot, still wearing her boots and keeping her gun within reach, old habits died hard. She realized she hadn't thought about Thornberry's or Jake or the riders in the dust for the past hour. Strange how quickly the mind could shift from one concern to another, like a horse changing leads. The storm raged on, but inside the thick walls it was just background noise. Wade continued his mending, the needle catching firelight as it moved. Neither of them mentioned that she hadn't said where she was going, and he hadn't said what he was doing in this forgotten corner of nowhere. Some things didn't need saying. Not yet. Anyway, the dust storm had been raging for 3 hours when Wade Callahan heard the horse. Most men wouldn't have caught it over the howling wind, but Wade had spent enough nights listening for trouble to recognize the broken rhythm of a tired mount pushing through bad weather. He set down the harness he'd been mending, fingers stilling on the leather as he tracked the sound, coming from the east, moving slow. He'd been alone here for 2 months, seeing nobody except the occasional freight hauler who knew about this shelter. That was how he preferred it. People meant questions, and questions meant remembering things better left buried. But the desert had its own laws, and the first one was simple: you didn't leave anyone to die in a storm. Wade moved to the door, lifting the bar and pulling it open just enough to peer out. The world beyond was a wall of whirling dust, visibility down to maybe 10 feet. But there, a shape materialized from the chaos. Horse and rider both coated in red dirt until they looked like they'd been carved from the desert itself. The rider was slumped forward, barely holding on. A woman, he realized, as the horse stumbled to a stop just shy of the doorway. She lifted her head, squinting through the dust, and he saw fierce green eyes and a face masked with grit. "Inside," Wade said, not wasting words. He reached for the horse's bridle, steadying the animal as the woman half fell, half climbed from the saddle. She didn't argue, didn't question, just grabbed her saddlebags and pushed through the door while he led her mare around to the lean-to. By the time he got the horse settled, a good-looking bay despite the coating of dust, and fought his way back inside. The woman had collapsed in one of his chairs. She wasn't unconscious, just exhausted. Her hat had fallen off, revealing dark hair that might have been brown or black under all the dirt. She was tall for a woman, strongly built, with hands that spoke of hard work. Not a town lady, that was certain. Wade poured water from his pitcher into a basin, set it on the table with a clean cloth. Then he turned to the stove, where a pot of tea had been steeping. Sage tea, good for clearing dust from the throat. "Thank you," she said, voice hoarse. She'd used the water to clean her face, revealing sun-weathered skin and a determined jaw. Maybe late 20s, maybe 30. Hard to tell with women who'd lived rough. He set the tea in front of her, then threw a blanket across her shoulders. She was shivering despite the warmth of the room-delayed reaction to fighting through the storm. Wade had seen it before. "Name's Nora Beckett," she said after a long drink of tea. "Wade Callahan," he replied, settling back into his own chair. She looked around the spare room, taking in details the way someone did when they'd learned to size up situations fast. Her eyes lingered on his rifle propped in the corner, the neat stack of supplies, the single narrow cot. When her gaze came back to him, there was a question in it she didn't voice. "Line shack," Wade offered. "Nobody's claimed this stretch yet. Freighters use it sometimes when they're running the old stage route. It wasn't entirely true. He paid a small rent to the Aztec Land and Cattle Company for the privilege of squatting here, fixing up their abandoned shelter in exchange for being left alone. But that was more explanation than necessary. Nora nodded, accepting the half-truth without pushing. Storm came up fast. Thought I could outrun it. Desert storms don't get outrun, Wade said mildly. Just endured. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Sounds like you've endured a few... My share. They sat in companionable silence while the wind battered the walls. Wade went back to his harness work, fingers moving by memory. Nora finished her tea, then pulled off her boots with a soft groan. Water sloshed out. She'd been riding through a wash when the storm hit, most likely. There's grain in the lean-to, Wade said without looking up. Your horse looked spent. She is. We've been pushing hard since yesterday. Nora hesitated, then added, I'll pay for the grain. And the shelter. No need. I pay my way, she said, and there was steel in her voice despite the exhaustion. Wade looked up then, meeting those green eyes straight on. So do I. And the way I figure it, giving shelter in a storm isn't business. It's just what's done. She held his gaze for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. Then she nodded once, accepting. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it was getting worse, the wind rising to a shriek that had both of them glancing at the door. Wade had reinforced it when he'd fixed up the place, but nature had a way of finding weak spots. Could last all night, he said, sometimes 2 days, this time of year. Nora's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. A woman worried about time, then meeting someone, maybe, or getting somewhere before someone else did. Not his business. Cot's yours when you're ready. Wade continued. I'll take the chair. I couldn't. You could and you will. He kept his tone matter-of-fact. I've slept in this chair more nights than the cot anyway. Prefer it. That was true enough. The cot put his back to the door, and old habits died hard. In the chair, he could see both door and window, could reach his rifle in 2 seconds flat if needed. Nora looked like she wanted to argue, but another gust of wind shook the building hard enough to rain dust from the rafters. She glanced at the cot, and Wade could see her weighing pride against bone-deep tiredness. All right, she said finally, but I'll be gone soon as the storm breaks. Fair enough. She stood, swaying slightly, and Wade had to check the impulse to steady her. Something about this woman warned against unsolicited help. She made it to the cot on her own, sitting down to peel off her damp socks. There's a shirt in that trunk might fit, Wade offered, nodding to the wooden box at the foot of the cot. Yours looks soaked through. She gave him another of those measuring looks, then opened the trunk. Wade kept his eyes on his work, giving her privacy to change. The rustle of fabric, a soft sigh as she lay down, then silence except for the storm. Wade, her voice came soft from the darkness beyond the fire's reach. Yeah. Why aren't you asking questions? He considered that, needle pausing in its path. Figure if you wanted me to know something, you'd tell it. If you don't, then it's not mine to know. A long pause, then, so quiet he almost missed it. That's uncommon generous. Just practical, Wade replied. Questions have a way of inviting questions back. Some of us prefer our silence. He heard her shift on the cot, getting comfortable, or as comfortable as a body could get while staying ready to move. He recognized the careful positioning, the way she kept her boots within reach. A woman used to trouble, or expecting it. For what it's worth, she said into the darkness. I'm not running from the law. Didn't think you were. Just from everything else, she added, and there was a bitter humor in it that Wade understood too well. He could have said something comforting, could have offered reassurance or philosophy, but that would have been insulting to both of them. Instead, he just kept working his leather, letting the rhythmic movement and the storm's white noise fill the space between them. After a while, Nora's breathing deepened, exhaustion finally winning over wariness. Wade added another log to the fire, settled deeper into his chair. The harness was long finished, but he kept it in his hands anyway, fingers tracing the familiar patterns. He'd come here to be alone, to escape the weight of other people's needs and expectations. For 2 months, he'd succeeded, seeing nobody except the occasional freighter who wanted nothing more than water and a place to rest. It had been peaceful, empty, maybe, but peaceful. Now there was a woman sleeping in his shelter, and Wade found himself oddly unsettled. Not threatened, he'd learned to read danger in people, and Nora Beckett. Whatever else she might be, wasn't that, but her presence changed the careful balance he'd built, added a variable to his ordered solitude. He'd help her on her way when the storm broke, give her supplies if she needed them. Then things would go back to normal, him in the desert and the silence, just how he'd wanted it. So why did the prospect suddenly seem less appealing than it had this morning? Wade shook his head, annoyed at himself. 2 months alone and the first visitor had him thinking foolish thoughts. He'd learned the hard way what happened when you let people matter. Better to keep the walls up, keep the distance. The storm howled on, and Wade sat his watch, guarding a woman who hadn't asked for protection and probably didn't need it. But sometimes, he reflected, what people needed and what they asked for were 2 different things entirely. And sometimes, a man did things not because they were asked, but because they were right. Morning came gray and still, the storm having blown itself out sometime near dawn. Wade had dozed in his chair, that half-sleep of men who'd learned to rest while staying alert. He woke fully when Nora stirred, watched without seeming to as she sat up and took stock of her surroundings. "Coffee's on," he said, not moving from his chair. "Cornbread too, if you're hungry." She stood, his borrowed shirt hanging loose on her frame, and moved to the window. The world outside was transformed, red dust coating everything like a layer of rust. "Storm did some work," she observed. "Always does." Wade finally rose, joints protesting after a night in the chair. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups, the bitter smell filling the small space. Trail will be rough for a day or 2. Washes might be running if the storm brought rain with it. Nora accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. She'd finger-combed her hair back into some semblance of order, but dust still clung to the dark strands. In daylight, he could see she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 27 or 28, with the kind of lean strength that came from working cattle or horses. "This place," she said after a moment, gesturing at the solid walls. "You said it was a line shack, but it's built better than most." Wade shrugged, cutting squares of cornbread. "Fellow who had it before me started the improvements. I just finished what he began." "What happened to him?" "Moved on." Wade didn't elaborate. The truth was, he'd found the man's grave marker 2 miles north, victim of bad water or bad luck. But that wasn't breakfast conversation. They ate standing, looking out at the changed landscape. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but Wade could feel questions building in it. Where exactly was this place? How far to the nearest town? How long had he been here? "Nearest settlement is Juniper," he said, preempting the first one. 2 days north if you're pushing, 3 if you're careful. South takes you to the border eventually, but there's nothing between here and there except hard country. And east. Badlands for 50 miles, then range country. Few big outfits out that way. He paused, then added neutrally, "Thornberry spread is biggest." Something flickered across her face at the name. "You know it." "Know of it? Old man's supposed to be fair, if you don't mind working yourself to bone." "Fair enough," Nora agreed, and there was a dry note in her voice that made Wade wonder, but he'd promised himself no questions. So he let it lie. She finished her coffee, set the cup aside with careful precision. "I should see to Buttercup, check her hooves after that run." They went out together into the strange amber light of a dust-hazed morning. The horses had weathered the storm well enough, though both were coated in red dirt. Buttercup nickered when she saw Nora, pushing her nose into the woman's shoulder. "She's a good one," Wade observed, running an appreciative eye over the mare's lines. "Mustang blood." "Half. Her dam was a cavalry remount, got loose and ran with wild ones for a season." Nora was checking each hoof as she talked, movements quick and competent. "I was there when she was born. Ugliest foal you ever saw. All legs and attitude. Best ones usually are." That earned him a quick smile. The first real one he'd seen from her. It changed her whole face, softening the wariness into something that made Wade's chest tighten unexpectedly. They worked together to brush the worst of the dust from both horses, and Wade found himself noting how she moved around the animals, confident but never careless, alert to every ear flick and tail swish. A woman who understood that a horse was a partner, not just transportation. "Your paint's got nice manners," she said, working a tangle from Buttercup's mane. "Train him yourself." Previous owner did most of it. "I just finished the job." Another half-truth. Scout had come to him wild-caught and full of fight, traded by a man who'd given up on him. 3 months of patient work had revealed a horse smart enough to be dangerous and loyal enough to be worth the risk. "You've got away with them," Nora said, and it wasn't a question. "Seen how he watches you? That's earned trust, not trained." Wade didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. They finished with the horses and headed back inside. The sun was climbing higher, burning through the dust haze. Soon it would be hot as any October day could be. "I should move on," Nora said once they were back inside. "Imposed enough on your hospitality. Storm might have muddied the trail markers. Easy to get turned around out there." She gave him a steady look. "You offering to guide me? Offering advice. Take it or leave it." "And the advice is, give it another day. Let the dust settle proper. See which way the washes are running." Wade kept his tone practical, like he was discussing the weather. "This place isn't much, but it's shelter, and despite what I said, nobody comes by regular. You want to lay low a bit. Could do worse." There he'd said it plain as he could without actually asking what she was running from. The offer hung between them, and Wade found himself holding his breath without knowing why. Nora walked to the door, stood looking out at the desert. When she spoke, her voice was carefully neutral. "You always take in strays." "Wouldn't call you a stray." "What would you call me?" Wade thought about it. "Someone who knows how to survive. Someone who'd rather risk a desert storm than whatever's behind her. Someone who pays her debts and keeps her word." He paused. "That's enough to know?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "One more day to let the trail settle." "Fair enough." The day passed quiet. Wade showed her where he collected water from a seep in the rocks, explained how the freighters knew to leave supplies in exchange for shelter. Nora helped patch a spot where the storm had torn loose some chinking, working steady without needing direction. As the sun started its descent, she asked, "What did you do before?" "Before what?" "Before you decided a line shack in the middle of nowhere was good enough." Wade considered how much truth to offer. "Worked cattle, mostly. Some freight hauling. Little bit of everything." "And now you just stay here?" "For now." He handed her another piece of wood for the fire. "Man gets tired of being needed all the time. Out here, the only thing that needs me is staying alive. That's a lonely way to live. Lonely and alone aren't the same thing." She looked at him then, really looked, and Wade had the uncomfortable feeling she was seeing more than he meant to show. "No," she said finally. "I guess they're not." That night she took the cot again, but this time Wade noticed she left her boots on the floor instead of right beside her. A small thing, but it meant something. Trust, maybe, or just exhaustion winning over caution. "Wade," she called softly from the darkness. "Yeah." "That previous owner, the one who started the improvements, he's buried 2 miles north. Isn't he? Wade's hand stilled. What makes you think that? Way you said moved on, and there's a carved stone on that shelf that looks like a grave marker waiting to be placed. Observant? He should have expected that. Yeah, found him when I got here. Snake bite, near as I could tell. You buried him proper. Seemed right. And finished his work on this place. Man starts something, seems wrong not to see it through. He heard her shift on the cot. Most men would have just taken what was useful and moved on. Most men would, Wade agreed. But then, most men aren't looking for what I was looking for. What's that? Place to stop running from things that can't be outrun anyway. The words hung in the darkness between them. More truth than he'd meant to speak. But something about this woman, this strange in-between time of dust and shelter, made the usual walls seem less necessary. Did you find it? She asked eventually. The place to stop? Wade thought about the last 2 months, the careful routine he'd built, the blessed absence of other people's expectations. Then he thought about today, working horses with someone who understood them, sharing silence that didn't need filling. Thought I had, he said finally. Now I'm not so sure. She didn't answer, and after a while, her breathing deepened into sleep. Wade sat in his chair, keeping watch over a woman who'd probably been taking care of herself just fine for years. But sometimes, he thought, taking care and being cared for were both necessary things. Tomorrow she'd leave, heading north to Juniper or wherever else she meant to go. Things would go back to how they were, him and the desert and the silence. But tonight, there was coffee for 2 and someone who understood that lonely and alone weren't the same thing. For now, that was enough. More than enough, if he was honest. Which was why tomorrow, when she left, he'd let her go without a word of protest, because wanting more than enough was how a man's peace got shattered. And Wade Callahan had had enough of shattered things to last a lifetime. The third morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of desert morning that made the hardships seem worthwhile. Wade woke to find Nora already up, standing by Scout with his saddle in her hands. The leather was dark with fresh oil, brass fittings polished until they gleamed. This was near cracked through, she said without turning around. Would have failed on you soon, maybe when you needed it most. Wade approached slowly, running his fingers along the repair. She'd found the weak spot he'd been meaning to fix, reinforced it with careful stitching that would hold better than the original. The work was expert, each stitch perfectly spaced. Where'd you learn that? He asked. My father, he was particular about tack, said a man's life could hang on a single piece of leather. She set the saddle on the rail, wiping her hands on her pants. Woman's, too. It was more than she'd offered about her past, and Wade didn't push for more. He noticed she'd also mended a tear in Buttercup's bridle, the repair so neat it was barely visible. Coffee, he offered. Already made it. She gestured toward the stove where the pot sat steaming. And there's biscuits. Found some flour that wasn't too weevily. Wade poured himself a cup, trying not to think about how natural this felt, someone else moving around his space, anticipating needs without being asked. Dangerous thinking, that. Trail should be clear enough now, he said, keeping his voice neutral. Should be, Nora agreed, but she made no move toward her gear, instead picking up a piece of harness that needed attention. This is for the freight wagons. Sometimes they leave repairs. I fix what I can, leave it for the next crew through. Good system. She threaded a needle with practiced ease. Everyone benefits. They worked in companionable silence as the morning progressed. Wade found himself watching her hands as she worked strong but precise, confident in their movements. Hands that had known labor but hadn't been broken by it. You ever think about heading back east? Nora asked suddenly. Where things are more settled. Nothing for me back there. Family. None that would claim me. Wade kept his attention on the bridle he was cleaning. You Had family once. They're gone now. She tied off a stitch, examined her work. Sometimes I think about it, though. Cities where nobody knows your name, where you could disappear into the crowd. Different kind of lonely. Maybe, but at least you'd choose it, instead of having it chosen for you. Wade looked up at that. Someone choose it for you. She was quiet long enough he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, you know how it is for women out here. Can't own land without a man's name on the paper. Can't work cattle without folks making assumptions. Can't even ride from one town to another without someone deciding you need protection or correction. That why you left Thornberry's? Her hand stilled. You knew. You recognized the name when I mentioned it. And that mare of yours has their brand, though someone tried to alter it. She was payment for 2 years' work, legal and clear. Defensiveness crept into her voice. Old man Thornberry wrote up the papers himself. Not questioning it. She relaxed slightly. His son might... Jake Thornberry thinks everything on that ranch is his by right, including the hired help. Wade's jaw tightened. He'd known men like that, who confused power with permission. He hurt you. He tried? Something fierce flashed in her eyes. Once. Won't get a second chance. Good. The simple approval seemed to surprise her. She looked at him full on, searching his face for something. Most men would say I should have handled it different, been more diplomatic. Most men haven't had to handle Jake Thornberry's hands where they weren't wanted. Wade set aside the bridle. Man doesn't listen to words. Sometimes he needs a stronger message. His pride took it worse than his body did. That type always does. She went back to her stitching. Week later, old man Thornberry suggested I might be happier elsewhere, paid me fair, but made it clear the suggestion wasn't optional. And now his son's pride is still hurting. Maybe, or maybe they just rode to town for supplies. But her voice said she didn't believe that any more than he did. The sun climbed higher, heat building despite the October date. Wade watched Nora work, noted the efficient way she moved, the care she took with even simple tasks. A woman used to making her own way, to having only herself to rely on. You could stay. The words were out before he could stop them, hanging in the heated air like dust motes. Nora's hands paused, needle halfway through leather. Stay, she repeated carefully. Freighters come through every couple weeks, always need repairs, sometimes help loading. They pay decent for honest work. Wade kept his voice practical, like he was discussing a business arrangement. Shelter's sound, water's reliable. Worst places to winter. She finished her stitch, set the harness aside. When she looked at him, her expression was unreadable. And what would folks say woman living out here with a man she's not married to? What folks? Folks always turn up eventually. Then they'd say what they'd say. Never found their opinions changed much of anything that mattered. Nora stood, walked to the doorway. The desert stretched out endless. Red rock and scrub brush and sky so blue it hurt to look at. I've been taking care of myself since I was 15. Not sure I know how to do anything else. Not asking you to stop. What are you asking? Wade joined her in the doorway, careful to keep space between them. Winters get long out here. Be good to have someone around who knows which end of a horse to feed. Someone who can fix tack proper and make coffee that doesn't taste like mud. That all. Someone who understands that quiet doesn't need filling. Someone who's not looking to be saved or to save anybody else. She was silent for a long moment. And when winter's over, then it's over. You go your way, no questions asked. He paused, then added, or you stay for another season. Your choice. My choice. She said it like she was testing the words. Don't get that offered much. Should be offered all the time. Just because it isn't doesn't mean it can't start now. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals up from the heated rocks. They watched it together. Two people who understood what it meant to drift on currents not of their making. I'm not an easy woman, Nora said finally. I don't smile when I don't mean it. Don't pretend things are fine when they're not. I've got moods that come on like storms and a temper that's cost me more jobs than I can count. Not looking for easy. Easy usually means false. And I won't warm your bed. That's not part of any bargain. Didn't think it was. Wade met her eyes straight on. Won't lie and say I haven't noticed you're a handsome woman. But noticing and expecting are different things. You'd be safe here. Safe as you want to be. She studied him for a long moment, and he had the feeling she was weighing more than just his words. Finally, she nodded. All right, through winter. We'll see how it goes. All right. They went back inside, back to the small tasks that filled a desert day. But something had shifted, settled into place like a foundation stone. Not a promise exactly, more like an agreement to possibility. That evening, Wade cleared tools from the second chair, set it across from his own by the fire. Nora watched him arrange things, creating space where there'd only been solitude before. Might need more supplies, she said, if I'm staying. List is there. He pointed to a paper tacked to the wall. Freighters due through in a week, maybe less. She examined the list, added a few items in neat handwriting. Practical things: flour, beans, salt, nothing fancy. Nothing that suggested she expected more than basic shelter. I can hunt, she offered. Decent shot with a rifle. Better with traps. Rabbit's good eating out here. Deer sometimes come down from the high country. And I'll need to earn my keep. Whatever needs doing: building, fixing, hauling. Plenty of all three. They settled into their chairs as darkness fell. Wade found himself oddly conscious of the sound of her breathing, the small movements as she shifted position. For 2 months, this place had held only his own presence. Now there was another, and the space felt both smaller and larger for it. Wade, she said as the fire burned low. Yeah. That grave marker. We should place it proper. He was quiet for a moment. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. It felt like a bargain sealed, though neither of them said so. Tomorrow they'd honor a stranger who'd started something he couldn't finish. Then they'd continue his work. 2 people who'd found shelter in more ways than one. Wade added another log to the fire. Watched sparks rise toward the smoke hole. Beside him. Nora pulled off her boots, stretched her feet toward the warmth. Such a small thing. But it spoke of staying, of choosing to be comfortable instead of ready to run. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For offering without asking, for making it simple. Nothing's simple. No, she smiled slightly. But it's good to pretend sometimes. The fire crackled between them, pushing back the desert cold. Tomorrow there would be work. There was always work. But tonight there was warmth and company and the quiet understanding of 2 people who'd learned to survive alone, discovering they might not have to. It wasn't much, but it was enough. And sometimes, Wade thought, enough was its own kind of plenty. The cold came sudden that night, the way it did in the desert when winter flexed its muscles early. Wade woke to the sound of wind rattling the shutters and the peculiar silence that meant the temperature had dropped hard. His breath showed white in the air. He'd banked the fire before sleeping, but the coals had died to almost nothing. Getting up from his chair, joints stiff with cold, he reached for the woodpile. That's when he saw her. Nora was curled tight on the cot, the single blanket pulled up to her chin. Even in the dim light, he could see her shivering. She'd gone to sleep in her clothes like always, but desert cold had a way of cutting through everything. Wade built the fire up quick and quiet, feeding it until flames danced high. The warmth would take time to fill the space. He looked at his own blanket draped over the chair, then at Nora trembling on the cot. No decision to make, really. He picked up his blanket and moved to the cot, laying it over her careful as he could. She stirred but didn't wake, unconsciously pulling the extra layer closer. Wade went back to his chair, pulled his coat tight, and settled in to wait for warmth. An hour passed. The fire caught proper, heat starting to push back the cold, but Nora kept shivering. Wade could hear her teeth chattering even from across the room. He added more wood, moved his chair closer to the flames. Cold, Nora muttered, somewhere between sleep and waking. Fire's going. It'll warm up. She struggled to sit up, still wrapped in both blankets. You gave me yours. Wasn't using it. Liar. Her voice was thick with sleep and cold. Get over here. I'm fine. Wade. There was something in the way she said his name, not pleading, just stating fact. We're both freezing. This is stupid. She was right, and they both knew it. Pride was a poor defense against desert winter. Wade stood, grabbed his coat from the chair. Turn around, he said. She did, facing the wall. He lay down on the cot's edge, careful to keep space between them, and pulled his coat over both of them. The cot wasn't made for two, barely wide enough for the arrangement, but the shared warmth was immediate. This doesn't change anything, Nora said to the wall. Know that. Just surviving. That's all. They lay rigid as fence posts, both trying to take up as little space as possible. The fire crackled, slowly filling the room with blessed heat. Wade could feel Nora's shivers gradually easing, her breathing becoming less ragged. My father used to say cold like this meant snow in the high country, she said quietly. Said you could smell it on the wind. He was probably right. This feels like snow weather. First winter after he died, I near froze in a line shack not half as solid as this one. Burnt everything I could find, old crates, broke down furniture, even some leather I should have saved. Come morning, I promised myself I'd never be that cold again. But you were. Dozen times since. Desert doesn't care about promises. Wade felt her shift slightly, trying to find comfort without touching him. An impossible task on a cot this narrow. You can relax, he said. I'm not Jake Thornberry. I know that. A pause. That's what makes it complicated. He understood. Simple dangers were easy to guard against. It was the complicated ones, trust, comfort, the treacherous warmth of human connection that could sneak past defenses built over years. Nothing complicated about not freezing, he said. She actually laughed at that, a soft sound that seemed to surprise them both. Spoken like a man. How would a woman speak it? Everything's complicated when you're a woman alone. Every kindness might have a price. Every shelter might become a trap. She pulled the blankets tighter. You learned to sleep cold rather than risk sleeping warm. That why you fought it to sleep? Among other reasons. She was quiet for a moment. You make me weak. Wade Callahan. The words hung between them, unexpected as summer rain. Wade felt his chest tighten, knew he should say something. But what, that she made him weak too, that strength and weakness got all tangled up when two people stopped being just themselves. Then sleep, he said finally, keeping his voice steady, and let me be strong for you. She turned then, just enough to look at him over her shoulder. In the firelight, her eyes were deep as wells. You mean that? Not a question, but he answered anyway. Every word. Most men would take advantage, would see weakness as opportunity. Most men are fools. What does that make you? Different kind of fool, maybe, but not that kind. She studied his face for a long moment, then turned back to the wall. But this time, when she settled, some of the tension had left her shoulders. All right, she whispered. All right. The wind picked up outside, howling around the corners of the shelter. Wade could indeed smell snow on it, that metallic tang that meant the high country was getting covered. Down here it would just be cold, the kind of cold that killed unwary travelers. Wade. Tomorrow I'll check the roof. Felt some drips last rain. I'll help. And we should bring in more wood. Enough for a week at least. Already planned on it. She shifted again, and this time her back touched his chest. Just barely. I'm not used to this. Which part? Someone else thinking ahead, making plans that include two. Another shift, settling deeper. Doesn't mean I'll stop doing for myself. Wouldn't want you to. Good. The fire popped, sending sparks up. Wade watched shadows dance on the wall. Felt Nora's breathing slow and deepen. She'd stopped shivering entirely now. Warm between the blankets and his presence at her back. "Thank you," she murmured, already half asleep. "Just sharing heat." Not what I meant. He knew that. Knew she meant thank you for not pushing. For offering strength without demanding weakness in return. For understanding that trust was built in moments like this, small choices that added up to something bigger. "Rest now," he said. "I've got the watch." "Don't need watching." "Not watching you. Watching over. There's a difference." She made a soft sound that might have been agreement. Within minutes, her breathing evened out into true sleep. Wade lay awake, listening to the wind and the fire, feeling the unexpected weight of another person's trust. He'd told himself he wanted solitude, needed the empty quiet of the desert to heal whatever had broken in him. But lying here with Nora's warmth against him, her vulnerability, a gift she'd probably never given anyone else, he wondered if maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe healing didn't come from emptiness. Maybe it came from moments like this, two damaged people choosing to lower their guards just enough to let warmth in. Not surrendering, just sharing. Not weak, just human. The wind howled louder, and Wade pulled the coat higher over both of them. Nora murmured something in her sleep, her hand finding his where it rested on the blanket. Her fingers were calloused but small in his, strong but capable of gentleness. He thought about the morning, how they'd probably both pretend this hadn't happened, how they'd go back to their separate spaces, rebuild the walls that kept them safe. But for now, in the cold dark with winter pressing against the walls, they had this warmth and trust and the quiet understanding that being strong for someone else was its own kind of strength. "Sleep now," he whispered, though she was already deep under. "I've got you." And he did, all through the cold night, while the wind howled and the fire burned low and built up again. Wade Callahan kept watch, not because she needed it, but because she trusted him to. Because sometimes the strongest thing you could do was admit you weren't strong enough alone. Come morning, they'd face the day as two separate people again, working side by side but carefully apart. But the memory of this night would remain the night she'd said he made her weak, and he'd promised to be strong. And they'd both learned that maybe those weren't opposite things after all. The fire crackled, the wind sang, and in a small shelter in the middle of nowhere, two people slept warm for the first time in longer than either could remember. Dawn came pale and cold, frost painting the windows white. Wade woke first, careful not to disturb Nora as he eased from the cot. She murmured something, burrowing deeper into the blankets, and he took a moment to rebuild the fire before stepping outside. The sight that greeted him stopped him short. A freight wagon sat tilted at the edge of the trail, one wheel buried axle deep in a wash that yesterday's wind had filled with sand. 3 men stood around it, their breath fogging in the cold morning air. "Morning," called the tallest of them, a weathered man with silver threading his beard. "Sorry to impose, but we hit trouble in the night." Wade approached, assessing the situation. The wagon was loaded too heavy for 3 men to lift, even if they could dig out the wheel. "Coffee's on," he said. "Let me get my tools." "Much obliged. Name's Samuel Morrison. These are my boys, James and Peter." The sons looked to be early 20s, one dark like his father, one fair like a mother Wade would never meet. They had the lean, hard look of men who'd grown up working. Wade fetched rope and his shovel, noting how the Morrisons watched him with the careful attention of men who'd learned to judge character quick. "Wade Callahan," he offered. "Been minding this place a few months." They set to digging out the wheel, working in the efficient rhythm of men who knew their business. Wade noticed the younger son, Peter, kept glancing toward the shelter. "Someone moving around in there," the boy said eventually. "Partner," Wade replied. keeping it simple. She'll have coffee ready directly. The elder Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly at she, but he said nothing. They kept digging, Wade rigging a lever system with poles from the wagon's spare lumber. That's when Nora emerged. She'd taken time to pin up her hair and wash her face, but there was no hiding what she was, a woman dressed for work, moving with the easy confidence of someone who belonged wherever she chose to stand. She carried the coffee pot and a stack of tin cups. "Gentlemen," she said, voice neutral as winter sky. "Looks like you've had a time of it." Wade watched the Morrisons react: surprise, assessment, the quick exchange of glances between father and sons. But Samuel Morrison had been raised right. He pulled off his hat, nudged his boys to do the same. "Ma'am, Samuel Morrison. These are my sons. We're grateful for the help." "Nora Beckett." She poured coffee with steady hands. "And it's Wade doing the helping. I'm just providing coffee." But even as she said it, she was studying the wagon's angle, the depth of the wheel. "You'll need to unload some weight first," she said. "That leverage won't work with the wagon full." Peter started to say something. Wade could see the dismissal forming, but his father cut him off with a look. "You're right," Samuel said. "Boys, start shifting those grain sacks." They worked through the morning, Nora alongside the men without comment or invitation. She had a good eye for problems. Wade noticed, spotting where they needed to shore up the sand before it could shift again, suggesting a different angle for the pull that would put less strain on the wagon's frame. "You know freight work," Samuel observed, watching her redirect the rope placement. "Done some here and there. Not many women take to it. Not many women get the chance to try." The old man smiled at that. Fair point. By noon, they had the wagon free, wheel intact, though the rim was bent slightly. Wade had his small forge, really just a bellows and anvil setup, and he set to heating the metal while the Morrisons took their meal. "Your missus knows her business," James said quietly to Wade while Nora was inside getting more coffee. "She's not my missus," Wade corrected. "Just partnering for the winter." "Partners." The younger man said it like he was tasting the word. "That what they're calling it now?" Wade straightened from the forge, hammer still in hand. He didn't speak, just met James's eyes steady and level. After a moment, the younger man looked away. "James!" Samuel's voice carried warning. "Man offers help. You don't question his arrangements." "No offense meant," James muttered. "None taken," Wade lied. Nora came back out, and if she'd heard the exchange, she didn't show it. She watched Wade work the metal, nodding when he got the curve right. "That'll hold to juniper. At least, maybe farther if they're careful." "Juniper's where we're bound." Samuel said, "Market for grain there. If we can beat the Hutchinson outfit." "You will," Nora said with quiet confidence. "They always stop 2 nights at Red Creek. You push through, you'll beat them by a day." Peter looked surprised. "You know the Hutchinson crew?" "Worked for them one season. Good outfit, but they baby their animals. Sometimes that costs them time. And sometimes it saves them from broken wheels and sand washes," Samuel said mildly. But he was smiling. "Still, good to know. We'll push through." They finished the repair as afternoon shadows grew long. The Morrisons reloaded their wagon, Wade and Nora refusing payment despite repeated offers. "This place runs on trade, not cash," Wade said firmly. "You'll leave supplies on your way back through. That's payment enough." Samuel studied them both, taking in the neat shelter, the well-maintained tools, the way they worked together without needing words. "You've got something good here," he said finally. "Don't see that often." "Just making do," Nora replied. "No." The old man shook his head. "Making do is what most folks manage. This is something else." He climbed onto the wagon seat, sons flanking him. "We'll be back through in 2 weeks, maybe less. Anything particular you need?" Wade glanced at Nora, who considered Salt pork, if you can manage it, and lamp oil. Winter nights are long. Done. Samuel touched his hat brim. Ma'am, Callahan. Obliged for the help. They watched the wagon roll away, testing the repaired wheel with each turn. When it disappeared over a rise, Nora let out a breath Wade hadn't realized she'd been holding. "That could have gone worse," she said. "How so?" "3 men, 1 woman, remote location." She shrugged. "Done the arithmetic before?" "Morrison's solid. Raised those boys right, mostly."
"Mostly?"
She smiled wryly.
James had thoughts.
"James learned better." She glanced at him. "Would you have hit him if he'd pushed?" "Wouldn't have needed to hit him. Sometimes a man just needs to know you would." They went back inside, the shelter feeling quiet after the morning's activity. Nora started cleaning the cups while Wade banked the forge coals. "They'll talk," she said eventually. "In Juniper. About the woman living out here with Wade Callahan." "Let them." "Easy for you to say. Your reputation won't be the one in tatters." Wade dried the cups she washed, considering his words. "What reputation, the one where you're the best hand Thornberry ever had but got run off for not suffering fools, or the one where you can fix a wagon wheel better than most men who make their living at it?" She smiled despite herself. "The one where I'm living in sin with a man I'm not married to." Sin. Wade tested the word. Strange how folks worry more about where a woman sleeps than whether she eats. More about who she stands beside than what she stands for. "That's the world. Doesn't have to be our world." Nora stopped washing, hands still in the water. "Our world," she repeated softly. Poor choice of words. "No," she resumed washing. But something in her face had shifted. Just unexpected. They finished the dishes in comfortable silence. Outside, the sun was dropping toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. Soon the Morrisons would reach the main trail, start spreading word about the helpful couple at the old line shack. "You sorry you stayed?" Wade asked. Nora dried her hands slowly, thinking. "Ask me in 2 weeks, after they come back through, after we see what kind of looks and questions come with those supplies." "Fair enough." She moved to the door, stood looking out at the vast emptiness that wasn't empty at all if you knew how to see it. "That thing Morrison said, about us having something good here." "Yeah." He might not be wrong. Wade joined her in the doorway, careful to keep the distance she needed. "Might not be." "That scare you?" He thought about it, about the careful solitude he'd built and how quickly it had changed, about morning coffee for 2 and shared work and the way she'd fit herself into his life like she'd always belonged there. "Yeah," he admitted. "It does." "Good," Nora said. "Scared is honest. It's when folks stop being scared that they get careless." The first stars were appearing, bright in the clear desert air. Tomorrow there would be more work. There was always more work. But tonight there was peace and the quiet satisfaction of a good day's labor, of problems solved and kindness repaid. "I'll start dinner," Nora said, turning back inside. "You bring in wood for tonight. Feels like another cold one coming." Wade nodded, moving to the wood pile. Just like that, they fell into routine. 2 people learning to build something together. Maybe the Morrisons would talk in Juniper. Maybe word would spread. Maybe it would bring trouble or judgment or both. But for now, there was wood to split and dinner to cook and another night of choosing warmth over cold. The rest would sort itself out. Or it wouldn't. Either way, they'd face it together. "Partners," James Morrison had said with skepticism. But maybe that was exactly the right word. Not husband and wife, not man and woman in the way folks expected. Just partners, building something good in a hard place. One careful day at a time. The trouble came 2 weeks later, just as Nora had predicted. Not with the Morrisons, who returned as promised with supplies and careful courtesy. but with the townfolk who followed in their wake like buzzards trailing a wounded animal. Wade saw them first 3 riders approaching from the north, moving with the deliberate pace of people who wanted to be seen coming. He set down the harness he'd been mending and checked his colt, an old habit that would likely die with him. "Company," he called to Nora, who was working on the roof patch they'd been planning. She climbed down the ladder quick and smooth, noting his stance and the direction of his gaze. Trouble. Maybe just curious. She went inside, and he knew she was checking her own weapon. Not to use, necessarily, but to have options. They'd learned to read each other's caution in the weeks since the cold night, developed a language of small gestures and loaded silences. The riders stopped 20 yards out, spread in a loose line that might have been casual if you didn't know better. The center rider, a woman of perhaps 50 with steel-gray hair pulled back severe, spoke first. "Mr. Callahan, I'm Mrs. Eleanor Hartley. I run the boarding house in Juniper." Wade nodded, saying nothing. He recognized the type righteous women who'd appointed themselves guardians of public morality. They'd existed in every town he'd passed through, wielding gossip like a weapon and judgment like a shield. "We've heard about your situation here." Mrs. Hartley continued, her companions 2 younger women cut from similar cloth, nodding along like trained birds. "Have you?" Not a question. "A young woman, living openly with a man she's not married to. Surely you can see how that appears." "Appears to who?" Mrs. Hartley's mouth tightened. "To decent people, Mr. Callahan. To those of us trying to bring civilization to this wilderness." That's when Nora emerged. She'd taken time to pin her hair neat and wore her cleanest shirt, but there was no mistaking what she was, a woman who worked hard and made no apologies for it. She moved to stand beside Wade, not behind him, and met Mrs. Hartley's gaze straight on. "Hey, Mrs. Hartley," she said, voice pleasant as spring water. "Come a long way just to worry about where I sleep." One of the younger women gasped at the directness, but Mrs. Hartley was made of sterner stuff. "Miss Beckett, I presume we've heard about you as well, about your difficulties at the Thornberry Ranch." "Is that what Jake Thornberry's calling them, difficulties? A lady doesn't resort to violence, Miss Beckett." Good thing I never claimed to be a lady then. Wade felt rather than saw the tension ratcheting up. These confrontations had their own rhythm, and they were approaching the point where words could turn to actions everyone would regret. "Ladies," he said, drawing their attention, "you've ridden a long way to deliver your concerns. They've been noted. Now, unless you need water for your horses, I'd say your business here is done." "Our business," Mrs. Hartley said sharply, "is the moral fabric of our community." "This isn't your community," Nora pointed out. "This is open range, no town limits, another day's ride. Sin doesn't respect boundaries, Miss Beckett. Neither does self-righteousness. But here we are." The younger women shifted uncomfortably in their saddles, clearly unused to someone responding to their moral authority with anything but shame or anger. Nora offered neither, just that level gaze and calm voice that Wade had come to admire. "Mrs. Hartley tried a different approach. "My dear, surely you must see how this arrangement damages your prospects. No decent man will have you after this." "Good thing I'm not shopping for a decent man, then. You could come with us. My boarding house is respectable. You could work off your room and board. Start fresh. Leave this unfortunate chapter behind." Wade watched Nora consider the offer, saw her take in the 3 women with their clean clothes and soft hands, their horses that showed more care than hard use. When she spoke, her voice was almost gentle. "Mrs. Hartley, I appreciate what you think you're offering, but I've worked boarding houses, know exactly what kind of fresh start you mean, scrubbing floors and washing strangers' underthings for a room barely big enough to turn around in and wages that wouldn't keep a bird alive, all while being grateful for the chance at respectability. Honest work is nothing to be ashamed of." "Neither is this work," I mend harness, tend horses, fix what's broken. I earn my keep same as anywhere else. Only here I do it without someone standing over me counting every biscuit I eat and every minute I'm not on my knees with a scrub brush. You're living in sin. I'm living, Nora corrected.
Just living. And last I checked, that wasn't illegal, even in Juniper.
Mrs. Hartley turned her attention to Wade.
And you, Mr.
Callahan, have you no shame, taking advantage of a young woman's desperate circumstances? Wade had stayed quiet, letting Nora fight her own battle. But this required response. He stepped forward, not threatening but definite, and the younger women's horses danced backward. Ma'am, I'm going to say this once, clear as I can. Miss Beckett is my partner. We work this place together, share the labor and the proceeds fair and square. What assumptions you make about our arrangement say more about your mind than our morals.
How dare you?
Furthermore, Wade continued, voice steady as iron. She came here of her own free will and stays the same way. Doors never barred, and her horse is saddled whenever she wants. The only desperation I see is yours, riding a day out of your way to poke into business that isn't yours. Mrs. Hartley's face had gone red. Whether from anger or embarrassment, Wade couldn't tell. You'll find Juniper less welcoming after this, both of you. Then we'll trade elsewhere, Nora said simply. Carson City's only 3 days south. Might be they care less about where folks sleep and more about honest dealing. The lead woman gathered her reins, preparing to leave in high dudgeon, but one of the younger women, barely out of her teens by the look, suddenly spoke up. Is it true you broke horses at the Thornberry Ranch, trained their yearlings? Her companions turned shocked faces to her, but the girl kept looking at Nora with something like hunger in her eyes. It's true, Nora said, voice gentling. Why? I never heard of a woman doing that. Didn't know it was possible. Lots of things are possible when folks stop telling you they aren't. Mrs. Hartley yanked her horse around. Catherine, we're leaving now. But Catherine held Nora's gaze for another heartbeat, and something passed between them, understanding, maybe, or recognition. Then the girl turned her horse and followed the others, but she looked back twice before they disappeared over the rise. Wade and Nora stood in silence, watching the dust settle. Finally, Nora let out a long breath. Well, that happened. You all right? She considered the question seriously. You know what I am. Thought I'd feel, I don't know, angry, ashamed, something. What do you feel? Free. She laughed. Surprise in it. They came all this way to shame me, and all they did was remind me why I left that life behind. Wade felt something ease in his chest. He'd been ready to defend her, to fight if needed, but she hadn't needed defending, just witnessing. That girl, Nora said thoughtfully. Catherine? She's got dreams bigger than Juniper can hold. Seemed like... Hope she gets out before they squeeze them all out of her. They went back to their work, but the day felt different somehow. The visit had shifted something, brought the outside world into their small sphere and found it wanting. Wade watched Nora work, noted the ease in her shoulders, the quiet satisfaction in her competent movements. Wade, she called from where she was mixing roof patch. Yeah. What you said, about me being your partner, you mean that... He set down his tools, gave her question the weight it deserved. Every word. Even though the whole town's going to talk. Especially because of that. She smiled then, bright as sunrise. All right then, partners it is. They worked until dusk, finishing the roof patch and a dozen other small tasks. As shadows lengthened, Wade found himself thinking about respectability and what it cost. How many women like young Catherine were trapped in towns like Juniper, dreaming of different lives while wearing themselves down to nothing in boarding houses and marriages that were just prettier prisons? I'm making stew, Nora announced, breaking his reverie. With the salt pork Morrison brought, and biscuits if the flour's not too weevily. Sounds good. Set the table. Such a simple request. But it struck Wade how rare it was someone asking him to share in the small domesticities. Not because he was owed or owned them, but because that's what partners did. He set their mismatched plates and bent forks, poured water from the pitcher, placed the oil lamp where it would light both their faces. When Nora brought the food, they ate as they always did, comfortable in their silence, talking when words came natural. "She won't give up," Nora said eventually. "Mrs. Hartley. Women like that, they see a sinner and can't rest until they've saved or damned them proper. Let her come, let them all come." Wade met her eyes across the table. "Won't change anything." "Won't it? Not unless we let it." Nora considered that, spooning up stew thoughtfully. "Partners," she said again, like she was tasting the word. "I like the sound of that." "So do I." And sitting there in their rough shelter, sharing simple food by lamplight while the desert settled into night around them, Wade thought maybe they'd found something better than respectability. They'd found respect for each other, for the work, for the choice to live on their own terms. Let Juniper talk. Let Mrs. Hartley clutch her pearls and young Catherine dream her dreams. Here in this forgotten corner of nowhere, two people were building something that didn't need the town's approval to be real. Partnership. It had a good sound indeed. Winter settled in proper over the next weeks, bringing cold nights and short days. Wade and Nora fell into rhythms of shared work. She'd start coffee while he fed the horses. He'd split wood while she mended harness. Evenings found them by the fire. Sometimes talking, often just sharing the comfortable silence of people who'd learned each other's ways. It was a Tuesday morning when Wade noticed Buttercup favoring her left rear leg. Nora was already at the horse's side, running practiced hands down the mare's cannon bone. "Stone bruise, maybe," she said, frowning. "Or it could be an abscess starting." Wade fetched the hoof pick and held the mare steady while Nora examined the hoof. Sure enough, there was heat in the frog, a tender spot that made Buttercup flinch. "Needs soaking," Nora said, "and she'll be off work for a week at least." It was then they heard the riders, several of them, coming fast from the east. Wade straightened, hand moving to his hip, but Nora was already reading the dust pattern. "4 horses," she said quietly. "Riding hard." They didn't have to wait long. The riders thundered into view, and Wade recognized the lead man immediately, Jake Thornberry. Face flushed with drink or anger or both. His companions were hired hands, the kind of men who do whatever the boss's son asked and call it loyalty. Well, well. Jake reined up hard, his bay gelding dancing and blowing. "Found you at last. Nora, been a merry chase." "Jake!" Nora's voice was steady, but Wade saw her weight shift, balancing for whatever came next. "Long way from your daddy's ranch." "My ranch now? Old man took sick last month, signed it all over to me before he passed." Something flickered in Nora's eyes, surprise, maybe, or regret. Old man Thornberry had been fair. Even at the end, his son was a different breed entirely. "Sorry for your loss," she said, and sounded like she meant it. Jake laughed, ugly and sharp. "Sure you are. Bet you're real torn up about it." He swung down from his horse, and his men followed suit. "So you found yourself a protector?" "Didn't take long." Wade stepped forward, but Nora's slight gesture stopped him. This was her past catching up, her choice how to handle it. "Wade's my partner," she said simply. "We work this place together." Partner." Jake tested the word, made it sound dirty. "That what you're calling it, and here I thought you were too good for such arrangements." "Remember what you said when I offered to set you up nice in town?" "I remember." "Said you'd rather muck stalls the rest of your life than be any man's kept woman. High and mighty Nora Beckett. Too good for the likes of Jake Thornberry." His voice dropped. Went mean. "Don't look so high and mighty now." One of his men snickered. Wade marked him Reynolds. He thought, a hand who'd been fired from 2 spreads for fighting. The other 2 he didn't know, but they had the same hungry look that meant trouble.
What do you want, Jake?
Nora asked, tired suddenly.
You didn't ride all this way just to reminisce.
Want what's mine, that mare, for starters. Ranch property, stolen when you ran off. Buttercup was payment for 2 years' work. Your father wrote the bill of sale himself. Don't see any papers. Do you, boys? More snickers. Wade had heard enough. He moved to stand beside Nora, not in front of her, but with her. Saw the papers myself, he said quietly. Lady's telling the truth. Jake's eyes shifted to him, took in the worn clothes and steady stance, the colt riding easy on his hip. And who might you be? Name's Callahan, and you're on my land. Your land, Jake laughed.
This worthless patch?
You're welcome to it. Just leave what's mine and we'll be on our way.
Nothing here is yours,
Nora said firmly.
Not anymore.
Jake's face darkened. He'd been drinking. Wade realized. Probably started at dawn to work up courage for this confrontation. Liquid courage was the most dangerous kind. It made men stupid and mean in equal measure. You cost me, Nora, Jake said, stepping closer. Made me a laughingstock. Ranch hands snickering about how Jake Thornberry got bested by a woman.
You know what that does to a man's authority?
Should have thought of that before you cornered me in the barn. It happened fast. Jake's hand went to his gun, not drawing but gripping. His men tensed, ready to follow their boss's lead. Wade felt time slow the way it did when violence hung in the air like morning fog.
Jake!
Nora's voice cut through the tension.
Think careful. You draw on us. One of two things happens. Either Wade kills you, and he will, don't doubt it, or you kill us both. Either way, you've got bodies to explain. Your daddy just died. Ranch is in your name now. You really want to start your ownership with a murder charge?
Wouldn't be murder. Man's got a right to recover stolen property. From a woman, maybe. But Wade here, he's got no quarrel with you except what you bring to his door. Sheriff might see that different. Wade watched Jake wrestle with it, saw pride and sense wage war behind those bloodshot eyes. The smart play was to back down, right away, find another way to salvage his bruised ego. But Smart and Jake Thornberry had never been close acquaintances. I could use men like you, Jake said suddenly, looking at Wade. Good wages, steady work. All you got to do is step aside. Let me settle my business with Miss Beckett here. No. Simple as that. One word, quiet but final as a door closing. You sure about that, throwing away good money for a woman who ain't even yours? I'm sure. She bewitched you or something, that it got you so turned around you can't think straight. Jake's voice was rising. Getting that edge that meant violence was close.
She's good at that, making men think she's something special. But I know better. Know exactly what she is.
You don't know anything, Wade said. And now there was iron in his voice. But I'll tell you what I know. I know you're drunk. I know you're angry. I know you brought 3 men to brace 1 woman, which tells me everything about what kind of man you are. And I know you've got about 10 seconds to get on your horse and ride away before this goes bad for everyone. You threatening me. I'm offering you a choice, same as Miss Beckett did. You can leave vertical or horizontal. Your pick. Reynolds, the fired hand, shifted his weight. Boss, maybe we should... Shut up! Jake's hand was white-knuckled on his gun butt. Nobody tells me what to do. Not her, not you, not anybody. That's when Wade saw it the moment Jake made his choice. The slight dip of his shoulder, the way his weight shifted. Time stretched like taffy, everything moving through molasses. Jake cleared leather, or tried to. Wade's gun was out and centered before Jake's barrel cleared the holster. The crack of the shot was enormous in the morning air. Jake spun half around, gun flying from his hand, clutching his shoulder where Wade's bullet had punched through meat and muscle. Nobody else needs to bleed, Wade said, gun steady on the other 3. Get him on his horse and go. But Reynolds had more pride than sense. He went for his gun, fast but not fast enough. Wade's second shot took him center mass, dropping him like a sack of grain. The other two threw their hands up, backing away from their fallen comrade.
Jesus! One of them breathed. Jesus, you killed him!
He made his choice. Wade kept his gun leveled. You boys want to make yours. They scrambled to get Jake on his horse, the wounded man cursing and moaning by turns. Reynolds lay still in the dust, beyond help or harm. The two remaining hands tied him across his saddle, not gentle but thorough. This ain't over, Jake gasped, face gray with pain and shock. I'll see you hang for this, both of you. Self-defense, Nora said calmly. 4 armed men threatening a woman and her partner. Any jury in the territory will see it the same. We'll see about that. But the fight had gone out of Jake with his blood. He slumped in his saddle, letting one of his men take his reins. Wade watched them go, kept watching until the dust settled and the desert swallowed them up. Only then did he holster his gun, noting the slight tremor in his hands that always came after. You all right? Nora asked. Fine. You? Fine. But she was looking at him different, like she was seeing something new. That was a clean shot. Deliberate. You could have killed him. Could have. Didn't need to. Wounded man tells a different story than a dead one. She nodded slowly.
And Reynolds? He didn't give me a choice.
They stood there in the morning light, the smell of gunpowder still hanging in the air. Wade felt the familiar hollow sensation that came with killing. The weight of a life ended even when justified. It never got easier. He hoped it never would.
I'm sorry, Nora said quietly. This is my trouble. Shouldn't have spilled onto you.
Our trouble, Wade corrected. That's what partnership means. She looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her green eyes. Then she stepped close and did something she'd never done before, reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were calloused but warm, strong but gentle.
Thank you,
she said simply. Nothing to thank me for. There's everything to thank you for. You could have taken his offer, good wages, steady work. All you had to do was step aside. Never considered it. I know. She squeezed his hand once, then let go. That's what I'm thanking you for. They buried Reynolds in the hard ground behind the shelter, marking the grave with stones. It was grim work, but necessary. The desert had its own law, and part of that law was treating the dead with respect, even when they'd brought their death on themselves. As the sun climbed toward noon, Nora tended Buttercup's sore hoof while Wade cleaned his gun and tried not to think about what came next. Jake would heal. His pride wouldn't. There'd be more trouble coming, sure as sunrise.
We could leave,
Nora said quietly, not looking up from her work.
Both of us. Head to California, maybe, or Oregon. Start fresh where nobody knows our names.
Wade considered it. The offer hung between them. Possibility and promise mixed. A new life, a clean slate. Together. Could, he agreed. But seems to me we've got something good here. Be ashamed to let Jake Thornberry run us off from it. She smiled slightly. Stubborn man. Pot calling the kettle black. Fair point. She stood, wiping her hands on her pants. All right, we stay. But it's going to get harder now. Most things worth having do. That night they sat closer to the fire than usual, the day's violence leaving them both chilled despite the flames. Wade noticed Nora had moved her bedroll from the cot to the floor near his chair, her rifle within easy reach.
Just for tonight,
she said, seeing his look.
In case they come back.
They won't. Not tonight. Jake needs doctoring, and the others won't move without him. Still, he understood. Sometimes you needed the comfort of another person nearby, a reminder that you weren't alone in the darkness. They'd crossed a line today, moved from partnership into something deeper. Blood had been spilled in defense of what they were building. That changed things.
Wade,
she said as the fire burned low. Yeah, I know you've killed before. The way you moved, the choices you made.
That comes from experience. He was quiet for a moment. Yeah.
Was it always in defense, always justified?
Mostly, not always. He stared into the coals. Man makes choices, lives with them or doesn't live at all. Is that why you came here, to get away from those choices?
Partly. Mostly I came here to stop having to make them.
She shifted her blankets, and he heard the smile in her voice. How's that working out? Despite everything, he found himself smiling too. Not exactly as planned. Sorry about that.
No, you're not.
No, she agreed. I'm not. The fire crackled, sending sparks up toward the stars. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Jake would heal and plot. The town would talk. Supplies might get harder to come by if Juniper turned against them entirely. But tonight they were safe, together, partnered in truth now as well as name. Wade settled deeper in his chair, hand resting on his gun out of habit, listening to Nora's breathing even out into sleep. He'd been a fool to think he could escape the necessity of choices, of standing for something instead of just standing aside. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the point was making the right choices when they came, standing for the right things, the right people. Sleep well, partner, he said softly to the darkness. And for the first time since Reynolds fell, he thought maybe he could too. The snow came 3 days after Jake's visit, falling soft and steady from a gray wool sky. Wade had seen it coming in the way the horses turned restless and the air took on that peculiar stillness that preceded storms. By evening, the desert was transformed, red rock and scrub brush hidden under a clean white blanket. They'd prepared as best they could extra wood stacked inside. Horses moved to the most sheltered part of the lean-to, water barrels topped off before they could freeze. Now there was nothing to do but wait it out. Could last days, Wade said, watching the snow fall through the window. Seen storms that locked folks in for a week or more. We've got supplies, Nora replied, checking their stores. Coffee might run thin, but we won't starve. It was the kind of enforced closeness that would have made Wade edgy just months ago. Now he found himself oddly content, sharing the small space with someone who understood the value of quiet. They were settling in for the evening, fire crackling and coffee brewing. When they heard it, a horse struggling through the drifts, breathing labored. Wade reached for his gun, but the knock that came was weak, desperate rather than demanding. Nora opened the door to reveal a figure so covered in snow they couldn't make out features. The person stumbled inside and collapsed, ice-crusted coat falling away to reveal an older man, Mexican by his features, lips blue with cold. Por favor, he gasped. My grandson. Wade was already pulling on his coat. Where? The man Diego, he managed to say between shivers, led them out into the storm. 50 yards from the shelter, nearly invisible in the snow. A small figure lay curled next to a played-out burro. A boy, maybe 10 years old, unconscious but breathing. Wade scooped up the child while Nora supported Diego. The storm tried to tear them apart, wind driving snow horizontal, but they fought through it back to safety. The burro, hardy breed that it was, followed on its own, seeking the shelter of the lean-to. Inside, they worked with practiced efficiency. Wade built up the fire while Nora stripped the wet clothes from both grandfather and boy, wrapping them in every blanket they had. The child, Miguel, Diego called him, was in worse shape, his small body shaking with cold that went bone deep. What were you doing out in this? Nora asked, rubbing the boy's hands to restore circulation. Coming from the mines, Diego managed through chattering teeth. My son. He died in a cave-in last week. I take Miguel home to his mother, but the storm... Where's home? Wade asked. Agua Caliente, 2 days south. Wade exchanged glances with Nora. 2 days in good weather. In this storm. Attempting the journey had been near suicide. The boy needs warmth, Nora said. Body heat's best for warming someone this cold. Without hesitation, she lay down on the cot and tucked Miguel against her, pulling blankets over both of them. The maternal gesture looked natural on her, though Wade knew she'd never spoken of children of her own. Diego watched from his chair by the fire, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on his weathered face. "You are good people. God will bless you." "Just doing what's needful," Wade said gruffly. "You rest now. Worry about blessings later." Through the night they kept vigil. Wade fed the fire and made broth from their dried beef. Diego dozed fitfully, starting awake each time to check on Miguel. Nora held the boy close, her body heat slowly bringing warmth back to his small frame. Near dawn, Miguel stirred. His eyes opened, confused and frightened, but Nora's voice soothed him. She spoke no Spanish and he no English, but comfort needed no translation. "He's asking for his father," Diego said quietly. Nora's arms tightened around the boy. "Tell him his father had to go away, but his grandfather is here. Tell him he's safe." Diego translated, his voice gentle. Miguel's face crumpled, but he didn't cry. Too exhausted, maybe, or too used to disappointment. Nora stroked his hair, humming something low and wordless. The storm continued through the day. Wade tended the horses and the burro, fought his way to the woodpile and back. Inside, a strange domestic scene played out, Diego teaching Miguel to play cat's cradle with a piece of string. Nora making a soup from their dwindling supplies. Everyone careful not to speak of the father who wouldn't be coming home. "Your woman. She has the gift," Diego said quietly to Wade while Nora was showing Miguel how to whittle a stick. "The mother heart." "She's not my woman," Wade corrected automatically. "We're partners." Diego smiled slightly. "Ah, yes, partners." But his tone said he saw more than Wade was admitting to. That night, with Miguel sleeping between them on the cot, neither Wade nor Nora had discussed it. Just made space for the boy like it was natural. Diego told his story. 20 years in the silver mines, sending money home to Agua Caliente. His son following in his footsteps despite Diego's hopes for better. Now taking his grandson home to a widow who didn't yet know she was one. "She will need help," Diego said. "My daughter-in-law, she is strong, but the farm is too much for one woman." "You'll help her," Nora said firmly. "You're not too old to work land instead of tunnels." Perhaps, if these old bones remember how. On the third day, the storm broke. Sun emerged brilliant on a world made new. Everything clean and sparkling under its coat of white. Miguel had recovered his strength and his smile, chattering in Spanish to anyone who'd listen. "We need to get them to Agua Caliente," Nora said, watching the boy help his grandfather pack their few belongings. Wade nodded. He'd been thinking the same thing. The trail would be hard but passable, and Diego couldn't make it alone with the boy. "Both of us don't need to go," he offered. "Both of us should." She met his eyes. "I need to see them safe home. All the way home." They made a strange procession, Wade leading on Scout, Diego on Buttercup with Miguel tucked in front of him, Nora on the burro bringing up the rear. The snow made travel slow, but the weather held clear and cold. Agua Caliente proved to be a cluster of adobe buildings around a small spring, the kind of settlement that survived on stubbornness and community. The arrival of Diego and Miguel caused a stir, women and children pouring out of houses despite the cold. The reunion was both joyful and heartbreaking. Miguel's mother, a woman barely older than Nora, received the news of her widowhood with a dignity that made it all the harder to watch. She held her son tight, thanked Wade and Nora with formal courtesy, then retreated to her grief. "You must stay," the village headman insisted. "Rest, eat. The weather may turn again." They stayed one night, sleeping in the small church, before heading back. The return journey was quiet, both lost in thought, as they created a rise and saw their shelter below, smoke rising peaceful from the chimney. Wade heard Nora let out a long breath. "What?" he asked. "Nothing, just, it's good to be home." Home. She'd said it without thinking. but the word hung between them like a gift. That evening, as they tended the horses and restocked the woodpile, Nora seemed restless. She kept pausing in her work, looking out at the desert as if seeing it new. "That boy," she said finally. "Miguel, the way he just trusted, let strangers care for him because he had to. Children do that." "I wasn't thinking about children. I was thinking about me." She set down the water bucket, turned to face him. "I've been so busy being strong, making sure nobody could hurt me, that I forgot what it felt like to let someone help, really help." Wade waited, knowing there was more. "What you did back there with Jake, that wasn't just partnership. That was—" She struggled for words. "Nobody's ever stood up for me like that. Not because they wanted something, but just because it was right." "You'd have done the same." "Maybe, but that's not the point." She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the green-gold flecks in her eyes. "The point is, you make me feel things I thought I'd trained out of myself. Safe things, soft things, dangerous things." Wade's heart was doing something complicated in his chest. "Nora, I know we said no expectations. I know this is just for winter, just practical. But Wade..." She reached up, touched his face with one work-rough hand. "What if I want more than practical?" He caught her hand, held it. "You sure this changes everything?" "Everything's already changed. Has been changing since that first night you gave me your blanket." She smiled, tremulous but real. "I'm tired of fighting it, tired of being scared of wanting something good." Wade pulled her close, felt her fold into him like she'd been waiting for permission. She was tall enough that her head tucked just under his chin, strong enough that the embrace felt like equals meeting. "I'm not an easy man," he warned. "I've got ghosts, habits that'll take time to break." "And I'm not an easy woman. We've established that." Her voice was muffled against his coat. "Maybe that's why this works. Neither of us expecting easy." They stood there in the last light of day, holding each other while the desert settled into evening around them. Not passionate, not desperate. Just two people choosing to lower their walls enough to let another person in. "Partners," Wade asked against her hair. "Partners," she agreed. In all of it. When they finally went inside, the shelter felt different. Fuller, like it had been waiting for this moment to become what it was meant to be, not just a refuge from storms, but a home for two hearts learning to beat in rhythm. Miguel's small whittled stick sat on the table where he'd left it, a reminder that they'd saved 2 lives, maybe 3 if you counted the widow who'd have her father-in-law's help now, but sitting by their fire, shoulders touching as they shared the evening meal. Wade thought maybe the lives they'd really saved were their own. "No going back now," Nora said softly. "Don't want to go back." "Good." She leaned into him. "Just a little. Forward's more interesting anyway." Outside, stars emerged in the clear desert sky, brilliant and countless. Inside, 2 people who'd thought themselves too damaged for softness discovered that maybe strength meant knowing when to stop fighting alone. Partners, in all of it. It had a good sound, a true sound. The best sound Wade had heard in years. The weeks that followed were different. Not in the work, there was always work, but in the small ways 2 people moved around each other when walls had come down. Wade would find his coffee poured before he asked. Nora would discover her saddle already oiled. The stiff leather worked supple. Neither spoke of these kindnesses, just accepted them as part of this new rhythm they were finding. It was a clear March morning when everything shifted again. Wade was reinforcing the corral while Nora worked with a young Mustang they'd caught the week before, a scrappy bay colt with more spirit than sense. She had a way with the wild ones. Patient but firm, never breaking their spirit, just redirecting it. That's when they saw the dust. Not riders this time, but a wagon, moving slow and careful over the rough trail. As it drew closer, Wade recognized Samuel Morrison's freight outfit. But something was different. A woman sat beside him on the bench, and the wagon bed held more than usual supplies. Callahan, Miss Nora Morrison called out as they pulled up. Got some news might interest you. The woman beside him was young Catherine, the girl from Mrs. Hartley's Righteous Brigade. But gone were the prim dress and careful manners. She wore practical clothes, her hair in a simple braid, hands showing the calluses of real work. Catherine, Nora stepped forward, surprise clear on her face. Miss Beckett, the girl woman now. Wade corrected himself, climbed down from the wagon with newfound confidence. I hope you don't mind. I've left Juniper, left all of it. What happened? Nora asked. Morrison answered while his sons unloaded supplies. Girl came to me 2 weeks back, asking for work. Said she'd rather haul freight than waste another day in that boarding house. I figured anyone brave enough to ask deserved a chance. Mrs. Hartley must have had fits, Wade observed. Catherine smiled, and it transformed her face. She said I was ruining myself. I said I was saving myself. Big difference. Indeed there is, Nora agreed warmly. You hungry coffee's always on. As they gathered around the rough table, Morrison shared the real news. Jake Thornberry's been spreading tales in town. Says you two murdered his man in cold blood, that you're outlaws hiding out here. And Wade kept his voice level. And nobody much believes him. See, Diego Morales came through last week with his grandson, told everyone how you saved their lives in the storm, got them safe to Agua Caliente. Hard to paint folks as villains when they're saving children. Plus, Catherine added, everyone knows what Jake is like, even Mrs. Hartley had to admit his character is questionable. Speaking of Jake, Morrison continued, he's been having troubles. Seems his heavy hand with the hired help has led to most of them quitting. Ranch is struggling. Word is he might have to sell off sections to pay debts his father left. Wade felt no satisfaction in the news. Men like Jake usually found someone else to blame for their failures. But at least it meant he was too busy to plan more trouble for them. There's more, Morrison said, glancing between Wade and Nora. Town council's been talking. This stretch of land here, it's coming up for proper claiming. Government's pushing to get titles settled. You two could file, make this official, build something real permanent. Wade looked at Nora, saw his own thoughts reflected in her eyes. They'd been living day to day, season to season. The idea of permanent was both thrilling and terrifying. Together, Nora asked carefully. They'd let us file together. As partners, yes, business partners. The law calls it course. Some folks register different kinds of partnerships, if you take my meaning. Catherine was watching them with bright interest. You could do it. Show everyone that there's more than one way to live out here, that women don't have to choose between marriage and independence. It's not that simple, Nora said gently. Why not? Catherine's chin lifted, reminding Wade of Nora herself. You're already doing it. Living proof it works. All you'd be doing is making it official. They talked through the afternoon about land prices, water rights, the legal requirements for filing. Morrison had brought the necessary papers, just in case. As the sun started its descent, he prepared to leave. Catherine's staying on with us permanent, he announced. Good hand with the horses, better with figures. Been teaching my boys their letters too. You ever need supplies brought out special, she'll be the one coming. Catherine blushed at the praise but stood tall. Before climbing back on the wagon, she caught Nora's hands. Thank you, she said quietly. That day when Mrs. Hartley came out here, seeing you stand your ground, it changed something in me, showed me I had choices. After they'd gone, Wade and Nora sat by the fire in comfortable silence. The land papers lay on the table between them, official and waiting. Big step, Wade said finally. Bigger than some we've already taken. True enough. He picked up the papers, studied them. Your name would go first, equal partners, but your name first. Why? Because you were here first, that morning in the storm. Because this place became home when you stayed.
Because, he paused, then finished simply, because it's right. Nora was quiet for a long moment. Then, Wade Callahan, are you going soft on me? Maybe. That a problem? No, she smiled. That rare, full smile that lit her whole face. I find I like you soft, though I prefer you strong. Can I be both? You already are. She stood, moved around the table to stand beside him. So, we doing this, making it official? If you're sure. I'm sure about the land. I'm sure about the partnership. I'm sure about us. She touched his shoulder, light but certain. Question is, are you? Wade set down the papers, turned to face her fully. In the firelight, her eyes were deep as the desert night, holding mysteries and promises in equal measure. He thought about the months behind them, the careful distance becoming comfortable closeness, the wariness becoming trust, the loneliness becoming something altogether different. I came here to hide, he said quietly, from the world, from decisions, from feeling anything that might hurt. Then you showed up, all fierce independence and hidden hurt, and suddenly hiding didn't seem so important anymore. And now I want to build instead of hide, with you, if you'll have me. She kissed him then. First time for that. Soft but sure. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. Partners, she said. In all of it. He agreed. They signed the papers that night, both names clear and strong on the lines. Come morning, they'd ride to town together, file official, face whatever judgment or gossip came their way. But tonight, in their shelter that had become a home, they celebrated quietly two people who'd thought themselves too damaged for softness, discovering that the strongest thing of all might be choosing to be weak together. The fire burned low as they prepared for bed. This time, when Nora lay down, it was beside Wade without pretense or excuse. His arm came around her natural as breathing, her head finding that spot on his shoulder that seemed made for it. Tell me something, she said into the darkness. That first night, when you opened the door to a stranger in a storm, did you know? Know what? That everything was about to change. Wade thought about it, remembering that moment, her fierce eyes and a dust-covered face, the way she'd said his name like a fact that couldn't be argued with. Maybe, he admitted. Something in me recognized something in you. I think, like calling to like, two difficult people finding their match. Two strong people learning they're stronger together. She made a contented sound, already drifting toward sleep. I like that. Stronger together. Rest now, he said, echoing words from months ago. I've got the watch. We've got the watch, she corrected drowsily. Both of us, always. And they did, through the rest of that night and all the nights that followed, through the building of their official homestead and the inevitable visits from those who disapproved, through seasons of drought and plenty, loss and gain, through everything that came their way. They stood watch together, two people who'd learned that real strength sometimes looked like gentleness, that independence could include interdependence, that the deepest love often grew in the most unexpected ground. In years to come, their homestead would become a waypoint for other women seeking different paths, some staying to work and learn, others just passing through but taking hope with them. Catherine would bring her friends, young women tired of being told their only value lay in marriage and motherhood. They'd learn to work cattle and mend harness, to read the weather and trust their own judgment. But that was all ahead. Tonight, there was just Wade and Nora, partners in all of it, sleeping sound in each other's arms while the desert kept its ancient watch around them, strong for each other, weak for each other, and finding in that paradox a truth worth building on. The fire crackled, the wind sang, and in a shelter that had become a home, two hearts beat in rhythm, having discovered that the greatest courage of all was choosing not to face the world alone. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope it touched your heart as much as it touched mine to share it with you. Please comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening from. I'd love to hear your thoughts and connect with fellow lovers of these frontier tales. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like and hit that hype button to help more people discover these tales of courage, love, and the untamed American frontier. Until next time, partners.